Thank you for tuning into our podcast, Canal Days, What Life is Like in the Industrial Connecticut River Valley of Massachusetts. I'm your host, Carrie, and joining us today is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Camus. He personally offers and leads public and private tours and presentations of historical sites around communities in the state of Massachusetts. Currently, the communities he has chosen to focus on this year are Holyoke, Chicopee, South Hadley, and East Hampton, and also Granby and Amherst as well. His tours spotlight local canals, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as the local parks, streets, and selected historical houses within each community. In today's episode, we'll be talking about the Springfield Library. So explain about the Springfield Library and what it does and its connection to the other branches.
Well, it does like most libraries do. It tries to serve a lot of needs. So sure, it has a lot of books, newspapers, but it's also a source of massive amounts of microfiche and microfilm. Going back to the beginning of the Springfield newspaper starts. And I've gone to the library for many times to look at that microfilm. And so what we're going to do today is talk about the history of the library, and what's around the outside of the library, what the future might hold for this library, and maybe other libraries too. But back to telling us what they do. Well, since they're in a very large city, you're going to have very many branches. And I'll tell you the name of the branches, but they're also on their website. They have address for them and hours. The Brightwood, East Forest Park and Forest Park, East Springfield, Indian Orchard, Mason Square, and 16 acres. And it has so many neighborhoods and such a large population, it really needs all these branches. It also has a Library Express at Pine Point. All right, and it has many programs, of course, just like every library. Lots of computers and internet, study room and a reading room. And it also has many presentations about many things about life, and included for little children too. So it has a children's reading room and teenage room. So there's a lot going on here constantly. Make sure you're aware of the hours. They're actually closed on Fridays, and that's very peculiar, but the Central Library is closed.
And you want to tell us of the history of the library?
Well, like almost every location, it started with private libraries. Usually men's club and women's clubs would have them around. Our religious societies would have their own library, and they'd have subscription libraries too. But the public library finally came to Springfield in 1871. It's no longer here because it had to be taken down to put the modern library in. And that modern library is from 1912 when they started to work on it, and by 1913 it was open. So it's only about 111 years old, and it's a beautiful style to it. It was funded by Andrew Carnegie in his quest to have as many libraries around the United States, and he succeeded. And the Springfield Library itself, many branches of it look very old because they too were Carnegie libraries. And you should visit all these libraries, see what they're all about. Like the Indian Orchard Library is in the only village of Springfield, and maybe you'll like to see that one.
And really quick before we continue with the rest of our interview, just to fill our listeners in, if you want to find out more information or sign up for any of his various tours, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org. And there you can find videos and podcasts of the stops along each of his tours, as well as photos and text of the historical sites throughout as well. And for other inquiries or to book a private tour, you can email him directly at bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. And his tours are perfect for fun, educational, outdoor activities for families and group parties. So getting back to our interview, what surrounds the vicinity of the library?
Lots, and I'll mention some of them at least, but it's on the quadrangle, which is the information location of Springfield, especially historical information. But Behind it is Christ Church Cathedral, one of 3 cathedrals within Springfield, and that's the Episcopal Cathedral. And then alongside its other back, it has the quadrangle where the museums are located. And you have 5 museums there, plus a history room that's very active. And then it has St. Michael's Cathedral off to the eastern side, and that's the cathedral for the Catholic Church. And then around back, it has the rest of the cathedral's old building, because Cathedral High School started there, but it has a chancellery. Across the street, it has a former high school, now turned into homes for people. And so this area is incredibly busy. The most popular of all, of course, is the museum sets, including 2 art museums, a science museum, a history museum, a place for Dr. Seuss, including inside art museum and an outside garden. So this area is so incredibly busy, and if you're going to visit the library, make sure you have time to visit all the others around it.
And what do you think the future holds for the library?
I'm always amazed how these libraries change with the times. And, every 20 years or so, when society changes, they change right with it. When the internet comes around, then people had ability to get on the internet. That changed the libraries drastically too. A lot of books are now on the internet and usable from there. But the libraries have maintained their ability to get people to engage with the library services, including many more programs for all adult ranges and for little children. And also includes literacy programs, classroom programs. And the Springfield Library in particular has kept up its branch libraries to an extremely high level, whereas a lot of towns and cities haven't done that because they realize that people can now get in cars. But a lot of people in Springfield don't have cars necessarily, and so the branch library is still very important, and you might find that in a big city. But other places have closed their branch libraries. So hopefully it'll keep going in the correct direction and keep having good guidance for itself.
And thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours and historical topics of expertise. And we want to thank our listeners for tuning in. And you can check out a large selection of podcasts on his website, as well as on SoundCloud.com. And be sure to stay up to date with new videos and podcasts posted daily. And thank you for joining us and listening. Thank you for tuning into our podcast, Canal Days, What Life is Like in the Industrial Connecticut River Valley of Massachusetts. I am your host, Carrie, and joining us today is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Common. He personally offers and leads public and private tours, as well as presentations of historical sites throughout communities in the state of Massachusetts. Currently, the communities he has chosen to focus on this year are Holyoke, Chicopee, South Hadley, and East Hampton, and also Granby and Amherst as well. His tours spotlight the local canals, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks, streets, and selected historical houses within the communities. In today's episode, we'll be talking about the Springfield Museums, located in downtown Springfield. So, what makes up the Springfield Museums?
Well, simply put, a lot makes it up. There are a whole set of museums, not just one museum. And today we're going to talk about what these museums are like and what to expect out of them. And we're also going to talk about what else is in the area around the museum, including the quadrangle and beyond. And then about special things like Dr. Seuss. Can you imagine? Well, the museum started in 1857, has a concept, and they had a room in City Hall for a while. But in 1871, they finally moved into the quadrangle area where they had a museum and they had a library. All right, and then that library was taken down, and then the museums, other parts of it came around, Now, the Springfield Museums have a history page so you can read about them, but you have the art museums coming around. Then the science museums would come around and they would expand and spin, and that's definitely one of the most popular sites of all. Um, the Science Museum came around in this area in 1899. All right, and then you started getting the fun things like the Dr. Seuss, and you get my most favorite site, which is the Springfield History Museum, also known as the Lyman and Mary Wood Museum, because in there is a wonderful genealogy collection. And the Dr. Seuss has proven to be the most popular by far. And beyond the garden, they opened up their own museum in a former building. And so there's quite a bit that makes up these museums.
And what else is in the quadrangle? Is there anything significant?
There's a Springfield Central Library at one end, and the back door of that library, you could walk out of the library and be right inside the quadrangle. And how cool is that? You go from a library to 5 museums. And you walk through the most beautiful part, which is the Dr. Seuss Garden. Also around that quadrangle, of course, you have a former school, you have 2 cathedrals, Christ Church Cathedral and St. Michael's Cathedral, and then around that area there's a lot of homes and a lot of old Catholic schools, so forth and so on. So this whole area is very significant history-wise, and it's very popular. You almost never see it empty during almost any daylight hour.
And really quick before we continue with the rest of our interview, just to fill our listeners in, if you want to sign up for any of his various tours or find out more information, you can check his website, holyokecanaltour.org. And there you can find videos and podcasts of the stops on each of his tours, as well as photos and text of the historical sites throughout as well. And for other inquiries or to book a private tour, you can email him directly at bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. And his tours make for fun, educational outdoor activities for families and group parties. So getting back to our interview, describe to us the 2 art museums and what to expect.
All right. About a half century ago, my father actually brought me down to these museums when I was a young boy, and I became really interested in both art and science. And when I went to college, I studied science and math, but I also studied art history. And I went to Europe for 5 months, traveling around to look at many churches and art museums. And why? Because my father really encouraged me to go in those 2 directions. And so these are very special places to me. There's the George Walter Vincent Smith collection, which is mostly antiquities of the world. And there's also the Museum of Fine Arts, which has enormous collections of European art, but also American art, and a special Currier and Ives collection of lithography. So these are great places to go. I'm pointing them out because there's 2 of them, but there's also the Science Museum, and that's a fine place to see what the local area was like a long time ago, but also learn about science. And there's so much to offer in this area. And notice that through life, I do almost everything that is in these museum areas: art, chemistry, and then local history. And it's no coincidence, but because my father would encourage me to go into those fields. So I love these museums for that reason.
And can you inform us about the Dr. Seuss Museum and Garden?
Yes, in the year 2002, the Dr. Seuss National Memorial Sculpture Garden opens up. And that is very popular. You can outdoor look at a lot of the creations of Dr. Seuss himself. And then in the year 2017, that is only 7 years ago, the Dr. Seuss Indoor Museum opens up the amazing world of Dr. Seuss. And owls, too, are extraordinarily popular with people. And a lot of people going through now are very young children with their parents, and they're going to see those two exhibits, garden and museum. So, of course, you have to stop by those. And again, those are new, so a lot of people didn't know about them that went to these museums 20 plus years ago, but they're great fun. And they replaced a local history museum, which has moved over to the other side of the street from where most of the museums are, and that's the Lyman and Mary Wood Museum of Springfield History. That is its own building now, and has a special room for genealogy. But if you like antique cars, it's a great place to go. If you love old-time motorcycles, it's a great place to go. And make sure you visit everything on your day pass. But if you live in Springfield, everything's free.
And thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours and historical topics of your expertise. And we want to thank our listeners for tuning in. And you can check out a large selection of our other podcasts on his website, as well as on SoundCloud.com. And be sure to stay up to date with new videos and podcasts posted daily. And thank you for tuning in.